thanks for the good work on getting business and conservation together and to discuss also the policy perspectives. I hope you forgive me if I would like to just briefly look at how the issue of policies on ecosystem services and biodiversity, how that we approach that in our new program, which hopefully our members will approve during this Congress. Because I do think that that points to how it is that we need to work with the policies in mainly developing countries, but also in other parts of the world. So the first point, if we look, you remember we have 3 program areas in our program: valuing and conserving biodiversity or conserving nature. What does that mean if you want to be sure that you have a policy that actually does that and involves business? What it means, making sure that we are changing the current national accounting system and planning framework so that we actually get the value of nature into it. We've heard that so many times. It was said again in Rio. We all know that that is essential, that we really work hard to that. That will give the level playing field for business if it's so that these things are being integrated also in national governments, in national budgets. So that is really number 1, I think, in terms of pushing for when you want some policies to get a different way of accounting, a different way of planning that actually incorporates nature. So we need to re-examine the indicators that we have for that. Then, of course, we also can hope that governments will, again, within the first program area of conserving nature, valuing and conserving nature, that governments will encourage investments in natural capital. The fact that all countries have natural capital, whether it's for tourism or agriculture or management of ecosystem services, water and so on, encouraging investment in natural capital and encouraging investment in ecosystem services, again, is a major and decisive policy to actually achieve these purposes. So that's the first program area. The second program area we've now put into our program is about social equity and governance of nature's use. It's really about governance. We're saying it's essential that we start addressing the issue of governance. Now this is right at the heart of this afternoon's discussion. What policies are good for actually achieving this and enabling business to focus more on sustainability and biodiversity. The reason we put that into one program area was that we think that all the work on governance around the world has been fragmented. It's been very good in individual water projects, in individual forestry projects, in some aspects of building up environmental administrations and so on, but it's not really been integrated, and we don't have an integrated perspective on how should we have good and effective governance of nature's use. And therefore we think that that is an entry point that we can take together with business. If you remember, those of you who were, it feels like it's ages ago, but I think it was yesterday morning, listening to Rachel Clyde from the World Bank, when she talked about aggregated offsets, she was talking about issues when we have investments by companies, whether it's in extractive industries or it is in agriculture, and these companies desire to make offsets and are engaging with society, with communities and with governments in making offsets. Her point was that we have to look at that not as needle sticks, small individual projects that are offsetting, because that really doesn't give us any guarantee. But we have to look at it in an aggregated way. And where do you do that? You have to do it at the national level. Just a little parallel, many of us have worked with REDD, with the rainforest projects for many years, and we recognize that in that it doesn't help if we save the rainforest for carbon and for livelihood in one part of the country, but then cut down the trees in another part of the country. So a basic principle of REDD has been, it has to be national. When we heard Guyana's very exciting example of that, it has to be national. The accounting of how much you actually save in carbon, so on, has to be national. And the same must apply here. That was Rachel Clyde's argument. If you're talking about offsets, biodiversity offsets in a context, it has to be national. How can it become that? Only if we have a national regulatory framework which enables that. So that's an essential part. We need to, business, we, civil society, and governments need to work together to get a national regulatory framework that can guarantee that we, if we have offsets, can verify that they are actually leading to something for the country as a whole. This is going to be very difficult, but without it, offset really doesn't mean all that much. So we are looking very much into, under our second program area on governance, finding out how can we engage with regulatory frameworks that can address some of these issues. I gave the example of offsets. But in general, I think also a lesson out of Rio is that if we don't start finding out what is a good governance model for a green economy, then we are in trouble. I don't think we know that. What does governance of green economy, what does that actually mean? We haven't raised that issue. I was in Rio, many of you I'm sure were also there. It was not on the agenda. Governance in Rio was discussed about whether to strengthen UNEP or not. And with all due respect to our friends in Europe, that is really not what decides the future of the world. But if we can address governance in terms of how we govern nature's use, then we can actually have an impact. And finally, as you know, the third area we have in our program is nature-based solutions to climate, food and development. And this clearly is a case where we are looking forward to working with business, ensuring, hoping that there will be a common interest in using nature to address poverty, to address climate change, to address social and economic development, food security, and so on. And that requires, as I think I've told some of you, I have a development background, but that actually requires some good policies, some rural development policies, agricultural, food security policies. Without those from governments, it's impossible for communities, it is impossible for businesses to engage and to invest in these issues. So the last thing, or penultimate thing I want to say is, in that perspective of nature-based solutions, we take very much a landscape focus. We also do that when we discuss offset, but it's very much a landscape or seascape-based focus. We start from there, from ecosystems, we start looking at what can we do from landscape, managing them more sustainably, and then making sure that we get the different stakeholders, whether it's business, communities, peasants, governments together, making sure that they jointly manage landscapes better and then use nature to address some of the global problems. If we do that, then the issue is the landscape the right level for policies? And here I have to say yes and no, because as I mentioned with the example before on offsets, landscape management is good, but it doesn't really, it's not enough if we want at the same time to ensure that we really get the national level benefits from addressing issues like investments and sustainability loss at the same time. So we need to get from the landscape level, build up to the national level. Allow me one final comment to this panel also as an introduction. The panel is talking, the whole day is talking about biodiversity and ecosystem services. That's very much related to payment for ecosystem services, PES. I was struck when I was in Rio how little discussion there was about payment for ecosystem services. Whether we believe that this is the way forward, we have some examples with carbon pricing, we have examples from the water sector, we have examples from forestry, but we have not had a breakthrough for payment for ecosystem services. I think that when we are going to talk about policy with business people, we need to address, is payment for ecosystem services, is that a viable road into a way of finding policies and governance that are actually effective for sustainability? I think it must be. It is not yet. We haven't found the way yet in. The money that we are using for carbon, we don't have a fixed price for carbon yet, and without a really fixed price for that, then or a market for it, it's going to be very difficult. what the examples we have from the water sector are very good, but they are relatively small scale. The examples we have from forestry are mainly provided from aid, which is not bad, but it means that there's no market. It's funded from ODA, Official Development Assistance. So we haven't yet had a breakthrough in payment for ecosystem services. I think that that is a major challenge if you want to develop policies that really can address biodiversity and ecosystem services. How do we find a way to generate markets and generate financial flows that actually can create payment for ecosystem services? That's the best way, I do think, in the long run to address some of these issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul, for this introduction. And you're welcome to stay, but I know you've got a very busy schedule, so you might leave us at some stage. Welcome to this afternoon's sessions. You see on your chairs there are some yellow, red and green sheets of paper. There's a purpose to that, because I'm going to ask 3 questions, and I'd like you to raise your, or tell me your answer by raising the right color. Who was here this morning? If you were here this morning, it's green. If you were not here this morning, it's red. And if you were here but you left early, it's yellow. So can I have a show of hands? Okay, so we actually have a lot of people that found the interest this morning and then came back, but we had also some newcomers. So we will not repeat the whole session of this morning because clearly the focus is a little bit different. A question we did ask this morning was also, who are you from? Are you from government? That's red. Are you from business? That's yellow. Or are you from the NGO or the civil society? And that's green. Now, we have a good mix of business and NGO, actually a stronger business community, and regrettably, we've not seen that many governments. And it was actually a comment that we had this morning as well. We would wish to have more government representatives. Now, I'm actually very pleased that the government's representative level, I would say, up here is a little bit higher. The last question is probably a question I might ask at the end of the session again. What is your level of confidence that we have the right regulatory framework in place to conserve and value nature? So green, yes, it's already in place, we just have to implement it. No, it's not there at all, and that would be a red. Or it starts to emerge with a yellow. So can I have a show of hands, please? I see 3 greens, which is very good news, but I also see a lot of yellow and quite some red. So this morning we heard a lot about business and their action greening the world economy. This afternoon it's very much more focused on the policymakers and creating the enabling environment for all to contribute to a more responsible use of natural resources. Paul gave his input on how IUCN is trying to tackle this through our program and highlighted also the importance of payment for ecosystems. I will animate here a discussion with a very distinguished panel where you will have 5 different perspectives on this topic. And hopefully it will give you a good feel of some of the successful measures by public policy or other financial institutions in this arena. And the focus will also be at the end of our session very much on the public and private partnerships. So what I would like to do is to start with John Ekstrom. Jonathan is from the Biodiversity Consultancy, and I have to find my notes about you. For 10 years a tropical field ecologist and researcher in Asia and Africa. Jonathan then worked in the NGO sector before applying his skills to the needs of business and governments. He is now the director of the Biodiversity Consultancy. And John is going to talk us a bit more about the biodiversity offsets, and Paul already alluded to that a little bit earlier. Jonathan, you've got 5 minutes.
Thank you. So, thank you very much for the introduction. The Biodiversity Consultancy is a small group based in Cambridge of 10 conservationists, all from the major conservation organisations, from Conservation International, BirdLife International, WCS, and 3 staff from IUCN. I'm going to speak a bit today about recent changes in public policy around biodiversity offsets and the business response to that. I noticed this morning we didn't have much time for response from the floor, so I'd like us to keep all of this quite brief so that we can get some more interaction with everyone down there. So, very briefly, national and subnational governments around the world have been blooming in their production of biodiversity offset policies. We heard that yesterday from several individuals in the offsets workshop if you were there. This isn't just in OECD countries, this is also in non-OECD countries. There are currently 26 different subnational governments with biodiversity offset policies that require no net loss. That's 26 subnational governments in 14 different countries. This has taken industry by surprise. Since 2004 we had the seminal production of biodiversity offsets report by IUCN and Kerry Carter, etc. And that's when the Business of Biodiversity Offset program started. We were really surprised at the rate of policy development over the past 8 years. So we now have a situation wherein many industries are taken by surprisingly requirements of biodiversity offsets in the jurisdictions in which they're operating. Certainly the Brigalow Coal Belt in Australia, there's not actually enough land for offsets for the current land development. Situations where the offsets aren't available in the bits of Australia and New Zealand, so therefore the government is taking in lieu fees of say $50 to $200 billion per mine project. So there was obviously a large opportunity here for the conservation community to respond in terms of offset supply. So the pace of policy development has far outstripped any of the technical tools we've come up with to design and implement biodiversity offsets. The business response to this has been varied, certainly across different sectors. The mining industry has responded most quickly with the increase in net positive impact or no net loss policies. Dave Richards, sitting there in the audience, is the father of net positive impact, driving the policy through Rio Tinto around 10 to 12 years ago. And much of, I think, we don't have the graphs available. There's several papers available up on our website which demonstrate the rise in NPI commitments across the private sector. There are now 38 companies with no net loss or net positive impact type commitments. About half of those are in the mining sector, and there are many of the others are quite varied. There are amongst Comet, skateboards, Sony, etc. So there are a number of CSR type commitments appearing. It's quite unclear really what's behind those commitments. There's a framework behind it and behind implementation. But the 15 mining companies, and that's 7 of the 22 members of ICMM, have made no net loss commitments, such as De Beers and Rio Tinto. And I think this is the industry's response so far to the rise in government legislation. However, neither the governments have the tools to implement those biodiversity offsets, and neither do most of those companies. So I think afterwards we're going to talk a bit about scaling up and the response to that. There are a number of options. One of them has just been mentioned, which is aggregated offsets that Rachel Hyde mentioned in her keynote speech. I think we're in a strange situation right now where we've been encouraging governments and business to respond on the biodiversity issues. I think business and governments have responded to a large degree, but we as the conservation community need to facilitate, work with governments and with business to facilitate the supply of biodiversity offsets. And there's a number of options we could look into for that, such as key biodiversity areas and national conservation plans. So I'll go into that in more detail afterwards. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. I'd like to turn now to Milagros, and you know, hold your breath. We'll give you a plenty of opportunity to ask questions, so note them down if you have specific questions for Jonathan, but I just want at least to give a chance to all our speakers to present some of their cases. Milagros Sandoval, you're from Conservation International, and she's been closely involved in the forestry sector of Peru during the last 7 years, working in public and private institutions such as the Forestry National Authority and as well the Promotion Fund for Forestry Development, among other institutions. And she was part of the forestry program of the Peruvian Society for Environmental Law. But since 2010, you worked as the Environmental Policy Coordinator of Conservation International in Peru. And really the reason we asked you to come here on this panel is to tell us about the Peru Consultation Law, which is a very consultative and inclusive process, and we'd like you to describe that a little bit to us and how it happened.
Good afternoon to everyone. First of all, I would like to thank for the invitation to come here and talk about this important topic that I think has gotten a lot of interest for different companies, different stakeholders that would like to invest in Peru and have a little bit skeptic about what's happening with this consultation law and what does it mean. But I would like to start by saying also that I think, and I think many of us Peruvians believe that this specific legislation will create an enabling